Fundamentally, we are all sons of Sisyphus, and we all share Sisyphus's punishment. In the chaos of the world, some of us are born lucky and have the privilege of bearing this punishment on others for a while. For some, this luckiness evolves into spoiledness or fear in the shield of habit that grows with it, making it difficult to face this punishment. And these people are the ones we call moochers, neets, man-child, etc. They live in their comfort zone, and they don't roll the rock. Now this is bad, but as for those who stand in front and face the punishment, yes, they are alive, but they are not rolling the rock either. They tie the rock to a house, a bank account, an ideology. By adorning punishment with a definition other than punishment, they aim to take root where they are as a vegetative reaction, autonomous from punishment, so that there will be a sense of progress, a meaning outside of it in their lives where they cannot move the rock forward. The irony is that the neets who are actually hiding in the back are the ones who recognize the punishment, while the ones who stand in the front are the ones who denigrate the punishment. The only solution is to accept or ignore the punishment, and I wouldn't rush to judge which is better. In a personal context, independence is equivalent to self-sufficiency. But can self-sufficiency go beyond being an ego-flattering term? In action, self-sufficiency is an adventure that ends with living off-grid, watering the plants in the herb garden, and letting the plant provide what is sufficient for it. In all scenarios, it's impossible, but it's about being independent from other people, right? Considering that you would have to buy things, and you're not an omnipotent human being, and there's no isolated place left in the world. Sadly, impossible. Maybe we want to be morally independent of people, but that would be a ridiculous wish. That would be contradictory, because we are already quite immoral in that regard. No human being provides anything to another human being. Even whether we actually touch someone is problematic. A person living isolated in nature can have emotional moments alone. It's not something the other person provides, it's something the other person triggers. The only difference between eating store-bought meat in the kitchen with your family and eating meat you hunted in survival mode alone in nature is that the latter will get more views on YouTube, and both environments create a suitable ground for triggering various emotional states. First off, self-reliance is not equal to independence. If I'm self-reliant, I rely on myself and I dictate the responsibility to myself. I make others independent from myself and dedicate my dependency to myself. In a way, self-reliance is taking the burden and control by placing oneself in the symbol of their connection on the path leading to oneself, and independency is its consolation. Independence, a fetish, a guilty pleasure, an ideal from which you seek approval and superiority, like the ones promised by religions in their ascetic commandments, an ideal that makes us safe protagonists in tragedies whose aesthetics we love, but whose sensations we avoid. A catastrophic commitment to a fate that, unlike religion, is only isolated and colorless in the mirror of reality. While tragedy is a wave of the essence of life, this catastrophic commitment is to believe that this embracement heralds a fundamentally moralistic and indeterministic ideal. In spite of the injustice of life, insignificance is to idealize our existence as if fulfilling a noble mission. It is to affirm an extreme commitment to a catharsis rather than, ironically, to enlist others against tragedy, and to eliminate others who would distract us from our fetish by not giving anyone a share of that commitment. From the outside view, the person who follows this path, in contrast to the idealized stoic-esque independent human figure, dooms to be a maladjusted drug-deprived junkie whose dependency increases as he strives for independence. Why? Because he commits himself to an unrealizable goal. Life is a process, and any phenomenon that is appropriated is killing the process. In this context, this phenomenon is independence. And as you can see, self-reliance is very real in the sense that it is a self-destructing temperament, not a self-improving one as we construct it. So independency is a myth. Self-reliance, sadly not. And you know what? One must tag something to Sisyphus' existence. One must not let him be self-reliant, because that would be hell of a burden, taking him steps away from his punishment he will eventually deal with, just to alternate it with a myth that does not exist. So, you are not independent. You didn't level up. You're not somehow superior all of a sudden. You're just another Sisyphus, unable to roll the boulder. But there's one fact, being that you're moving towards being independent. If if you take that as a less anxiety-inducing explanation of entropy. But since most people see independence as synonymous with a completely different thing, we should also talk about the real topic in sketchy terms: self-identification. When most people say, "I am independent," the translation is, "I am an individual who identifies with a room reserved for me at the top of Temple X." And what is actually meant by this idea of identification is to be complete in a discrete way. To be complete is not to be identified. If one's desires are not something to identify with, self-completion simply means that there is nothing to lose and nothing to gain, that there is neither desire nor concern. Unlike the actual desire to be desired, non-individual desires, although based on personal goals, are dependent on the limited options of manipulative systems and are meant to prevent one's existential crisis. It doesn't matter what the person who achieves these non-individual desires does for self-completion, and it doesn't matter who the person is. You can only complete yourself by being selfish, by being altruistic, or by doing something different but defined, and maybe by giving a new meaning to a definition, or by causing a new definition to be created and by identifying with it. But if someone else is also selfish and altruistic, this may make the group, not the individual, but the definition itself more alive, independently of the individuals. In other words, one can keep ideologies alive, not oneself. According to Albert Camus, an admirer of Sisyphus, to live is to take the risk of being the opposite of the universe. If I were a tree among trees, a cat among animals, this life would have a meaning, or rather this problem would not arise, for I should belong to this world. I should be this world, to which I am opposed by my whole consciousness and my whole insistence upon familiarity. This ridiculous reason is what sets me in opposition to all creation. The individual is still just a herd, in the presence of a stranger who does not recognize his mask. As the embodiment of a stranger from the herd through the eyes of an individual, the character of meursault in Albert Camus, the stranger, presents us with the stranger who is not identified with anything and whom we all pass by every day. According to Albert Camus, rebellion requires unity. Meursault is an isolated myth, a myth because he is independent and independence is impossible. When Meursault goes to the nursing home where his mother is staying after the news of her death, he is asked if he wants the coffin opened. With a calm, even indifferent response, he says no. If Meursault, as a stranger, had been a random passerby, we would not have been able to care about how sad he was about the death of his mother, who was also a stranger to us, and what tragic moments he experienced. Meursault's existence is no more than our indifference to him. Meursault does not rebel with his presence. He is only present at that moment. Meursault is foreign enough to have sex with a woman in his house, not even a day after his mother's death, to think about the food on the stove and forget about his mother. He does not want to be more than a stranger, even to the woman who loves him. He finds her love absurd, as if she were a random stranger passing by in the crowd. He is a stranger to himself, and this alienation is not related to depression as in demoralization, but to pure indifference. At the end of the book, when meursault, struggling with sunburn, kills the Arab with the indifference of killing a fly, it is not because he is a psychopath devoid of empathy, but because he does not identify with an identity in modernity beyond being a primitive caveman. Meursault is an indifferent outsider to their attempts at independence and identification, but Meursault himself is as much a myth as they are. He is affected by the sunburn, but not at all by the death sentence after the murder. He doesn't see life as something worth living, nor does he romanticize dying. He's just that independent, if you like to call it that way. While this whole video is a philosophical thought masturbation as a non-clinical recommendation, I suggest you remain indifferent about meursault and independence, unless you are inclined to go crazy. Don't take life seriously, and keep joking to yourself that I am this and that. Just don't be serious when you say it. Being indifferent to being is cooler than actually being.